All right, so now we're actually going to move on to some draft stuff. Now we'll start at quarterback. I think we all know the conversation is pretty much Drake May, Jaden Daniels. We don't know who it's going to be. Now, there was talk, with the Vikings clearly trying to move up for a quarterback. Oh, maybe, they engage talk with the Patriots. Patriots take 11-23. And like you said, with the holes at quarterback, then you have some more capital to move up and down the board, get more picks, and really load up with a really talented class at a lot of the positions where you're weak. So first, because you did bring that up, I'm curious. Because for me, I feel like if you can get a Drake May or Jaden Daniels, and if in the building you think these guys can be faces of our franchise, I feel like it doesn't matter if you're not ready. Like you got Jacoby Brissett. If you think your offensive line isn't good enough or the pass-catching talent isn't good enough to maybe be able to bridge the gap where they get open quickly and make life easier, I think you still got to take the guy. In worst case, you bench him for a year just for his own safety until you load up. But if they're not able to do that, whatever the case may be, do you still think that you don't take the quarterback if you're not ready?
I think it's about whether or not you like him. If you love these guys, if you love Drake May and Jaden Daniels, just pick one because exactly like you said, you can just sit him for the year. If you think putting him out there would be detrimental to his progress, which I think you could make an argument based on their current supporting cast and the lack of resources they would have to add more pieces if they don't trade down, I think that is a totally reasonable place to land. But if you don't love the third quarterback, if for whatever reason you prefer one or the other, he goes at 2, and you're just settling on a guy, if you trade back and you give yourself ammunition in next year's draft to potentially come up and get one, I think that is a completely reasonable way to handle this. Let's play out the Vikings scenario, okay? You trade down with Minnesota to 3-11. So you get 11-23, and I would assume as part of that deal, you're getting a 2025 one as well. So then you'd have your first and a second 2025 first. Automatically, you're giving yourself the ammunition to position yourself for a quarterback next year. So if you don't love the third guy, I think that is a totally reasonable path. And I actually think in a vacuum, that's probably the path that I would follow. But I don't know if they love one of those two quarterbacks.
Right. That's what I've been saying. Really, it comes down to how they feel about them internally. But there's also talk about next year's crop and how, it's probably just a couple guys who are really at the front of the class. There could be a Jaden Daniels where they blow up this year and have a great season. And then, they go from somebody who's talked about as a third or fourth rounder to winning the Heisman or something like that. So how do you feel just from what we know now about that class? Because I feel like if it's Shedeur and like Quinn Ewers, are they really going to be able to trade up to get those guys? Because then you're in a situation like this year where, are the Bears going to really trade to give up a chance at Caleb Williams? Are the Commanders going to trade and give up a chance at May or Jaden Daniels? So that's the one part of it that scares me is if it's a weak quarterback class, then you kind of flirt with the idea of, all right, you might get yourself stuck in QB purgatory, where you got all these weapons and you don't have anybody to drive the car.
I think it's totally reasonable. And I'm usually of the opinion that if you're in a position to draft the guy, just draft the guy. But with where they are in the process, it'd be hard for me if I didn't love him. If I just thought I was settling on a guy because I'm picking third overall, if I didn't love him, it would be hard for me to turn it down. Because let's say you go from 3-11-23 and you really want one of the receivers. Well, now you have a bunch of ammunition potentially to move back into the top 10. You can do what Arizona did last year. So Arizona moves down from Stroud and then trades back up to 6 to go get Paris Johnson. That's also a path that you can take. So if you can come away from this first round with, let's say, a receiver and a tackle, which would be possible if you traded back, plus all the other draft picks that you have, and then you go into next year as a team that's probably going to be bad, right? Like if we're being honest, you're probably going to be a bad team. So let's say you're picking in the top 7, plus you have Minnesota's pick with a rookie quarterback. They're probably going to be an average team at best. So let's say you're picking 5th and 11th. That's a really good spot to start to try to go up and get one of those quarterbacks. And like you said, we didn't know Jaden Daniels was going to be in this position last year. So as much as it's tempting to look at the quarterback class and say, well, how many could there possibly be? I still think, again, in a vacuum, that path of let's just stockpile picks, build up the support system, and if we need to, we can go up and get the guy next year. That's what the Bears did. And ultimately, it turned out very well for them because they got the number 1 overall pick. But even if they hadn't lucked into 1, I still think it's a sound process overall.
Testing my skills on Prize Picks this season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $1,000 with just a few taps. Use the code CLNS for the first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
From what we do know, the Patriots sound like they really do like these guys. And they're probably going to stay put. That's what Albert Breer reported, that the Commanders and the Patriots were not budging. So, with it being, again, Drake.
You do that now, right? Like, what's the best way to get a haul for number 3 is if you tell everyone that you don't want to trade it away. So, I'll believe that when I see it.
That's totally fair. That's fair. But based on what we know, all right, so we went through the whole scenario of if they trade, if this, then that. If they do stay put, and it's number 3, Drake versus Jaden. Why should fans be excited if it's one or the other? And what should fans be worried about if it's one or the other with each of these prospects?
I still haven't dug into them as much as I'm going to. We're actually doing our big quarterback analysis show next week on the Athletic Football Show, where we're going to talk about all 3 of those guys, which I'm really looking forward to. We joked about it this week. We did the Idiot's Guide to the 2024 draft today on our show because right now I'm a draft idiot. I've been focusing so much on free agency, but I think the Jaden Daniels thing is you saw him operate in a very, very, very good support system last year. Like what he was able to do with those receivers and even the offensive line, like those are ideal circumstances. And as a 25-year-old guy who broke out in year 5 as a college player, I think there are very real questions to be asked about what he's going to be if you drop him into worse circumstances. Drake May, there's no questions about that. He was surrounded by bad talent this year. He had to fight for his life in the pocket, and what you're able to see him do as a scrambler off schedule beyond just like the size and the arm talent. I think that there's a lot to like there. So I think that the highs of Jaden Daniels, you can absolutely talk yourself into, but based on everything that I've read, based on what I've seen, the overall product that you're getting with Drake May, that would be the bet that I would make right now between the 2 guys.
I'm on the same page. Like, I like Jaden, and it's not going to be hard for me to talk myself into if he ends up being the pick, but I just think Drake's in a different tier. He's not in that Caleb Williams tier, obviously, but I feel like he's sandwiched right in the middle where he can be very special, and he's got all the tools, longevity. I feel like with the size over Daniels, I feel a lot more confident in. All right, so for receiver and left tackle, I'll keep this more philosophical. All right, I don't want to put you in a bad spot where I'm asking about specific prospects. So my thing is, okay, if they take a quarterback at 3, and then you're sitting at 34, do you take a tackle or a receiver? My thought is that you take the weapon, because if you're taking a tackle outside of the first round, that guy's probably not going to start year 1. They're probably going to be a developmental guy who's going to need a year, Scott Peters, get the fundamentals down, and then you see what you get from there. So do you think it would be prudent of them to take a weapon who they know at the very least can be that kind of explosive rotational guy who they can plug in and be that kind of big play threat? Or do you think left tackle is a bigger priority? Because that's also where I philosophically stand. That you got
at that range of the draft, I think that your chances of finding a difference-making receiver are higher than your chances of finding a difference-making tackle. History is just going to tell us that. I mean, there are so many guys picked outside of the top 32 have turned into superstar type of receivers. I mean, you could list a bunch off from the last 2 or 3 years. Deebo Samuel was a 2nd-round pick. AJ Brown was a 2nd-round pick. DK Metcalf was a 2nd-round pick. And you can find those guys in that range of the draft. And I also think that this is just like a positional value philosophy thing. I would rather have workable play along the offensive line and star level play on the outside than I would having the inverse. So if you can, through free agency or some other avenue, piece together offensive line play for 2024 specifically, I'd rather take a dice roll with a premium pick, which 34 is, to try to find a star at receiver, because I think that's more realistic than trying to find a star at tackle. And I think I'd rather have all pro level players on the outside than I would along the offensive line, all things being equal.
And honestly, the Super Bowl is a pretty good example of that. Like the 49ers obviously have Trent Williams. The rest of that offensive line ain't too hot. And then even the Chiefs, like obviously Creed Humphrey, Joe Tooney, you can make the argument, but like Donovan Smith is probably towards the end of his career. Trey Smith, pass protection was very up and down. I know like he got worked by Christian Barmore a little bit. So I usually tend to be of the mindset of like, you got to get the offensive line because then the run game's better. But at the same time, I completely understand the weapons are still very important. Who do you potentially like in that second-ish round range? Again, I know you haven't really dove into these guys, but is there anybody that kind of jumps to mind and says, if the Patriots can get this guy, then they're cooking a little bit with who they already have?
I think a lot of those guys on the fringe of the 1st and 2nd round are interesting, right? Like, where's Adonai Mitchell going to go? I mean, he's somebody that a lot of people think have like true number 1 talent. Keon Coleman is really interesting. Like, I mean, this is a guy who was mocked in the 1st round consistently. He's obviously, the ball skills are great. The contested catch stuff is really appealing. The testing wasn't very good, but the GPS numbers are. So is he a guy that maybe the shine has come off of him a little bit, but he can give you what you want on the outside. I mean, those are the types of guys we're talking about here. Xavier Worthy feels more like seasoning than a foundational piece. I think he makes more sense for a team that needs that specific skill set than somebody to build their offense around. But from what I understand, there are plenty of guys potentially in that range that could come in and be starting level receivers for you.
I'm glad you mentioned Coleman, because I keep getting all the N'Keal Harry comps, which I understand Patriots fans are traumatized.
Oh, that's totally fair though, because I'm not a contested catch guy. Like, if you couldn't get open in college, I typically don't go that direction, but I do know there are people who really like him.
But that's the thing with me. I don't think he's that. I think, one, he's like his contested targets and contested catch stats make it look bad. When I watch the tape, I'm expecting like this guy's going to be wearing coverage, but he's just going to beast people. I think he's a lot quicker than he gets credit for. Like, he's more deceptive in his stem than I think N'Keal Harry was. He's also not slow. Like, people forget N'Keal Harry was damn near 230 pounds. Like, Keon Coleman's not that big. I think he's a little looser. I think as a route runner, he's more kind of refined. He's snappier at the top for sure. He really sells those vertical stems. So when you see him on like comebacks and curls, it's a lot more effective than what you were getting from a N'Keal Harry. But at the same time, like, I'm thinking, okay, if they get Jaden Daniels, you want a vertical threat. Keon's not going to be the guy that's like running past anybody necessarily, but also you throw it up to him, he's probably going to get it. All right, we're going to round the – oh, I'm sorry, anything else?
Oh, I was going to say N'Keal Harry wasn't a vertical player.
No.
So if you're not going to be able to create separation and you don't do anything down the field, that's a pretty rough combination. And that's the selling point on Keon Coleman, is that at least he's going to potentially give you explosive plays, even if he's not consistently getting open. Like, Mike Williams has value in the NFL, even if he's not a separator.
Exactly. It's like Devontae Parker, too. Again, another guy who just put a bad taste in Patriots fans' mouths. But you look back at that Ryan Fitzpatrick year, where it's like, yeah, the only thing stopping Devontae Parker that year was health. He was a monster. Like, if you really are that dude, you can, again, I think that Keon Coleman's a much better separator underneath. So when you have that, when you have the yards after catchability, which you can argue maybe it doesn't translate, but he had like the fastest gauntlet time. So it's not like the guy is necessarily slow, but I do think he gives you more than like the one trick pony you got with N'Keal.